Rome, 73 BC. The Colosseum roars as Marius stands victorious, his gladius gleaming crimson in the afternoon sun. 10 years undefeated, yet tonight he faces a different challenge. A veiled woman trembles in his quarters, a virgin's sacrifice sent by laughing patricians. A cruel joke meant to disgrace the champion of the people. But what these nobles don't understand is that before the arena claimed him, Marius was educated in philosophy and honor. Instead of ruin, he sees something these pompous aristocrats never could: her worth beyond their game. Could a man who kills for sport find the compassion to protect what Rome would so carelessly destroy? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The smell of sweat and iron clung to Marius as he trudged down the narrow corridor of the ludus. Blood, some his, most belonging to his defeated opponent, had dried to a rust-colored crust on his armor. His muscles ached with the familiar pain of victory, a sensation he had known for 10 long years. The wooden medallion of Minerva hung against his chest beneath his armor, the last remnant of his former life. His calloused thumb traced its worn edges as he walked, a ritual after each survival in the arena. "Glorious fight today," called Doctor, the aging trainer who had shaped Marius from a frightened boy into Rome's champion. "The crowd loves you more each time." "The crowd loves blood," Marius replied, his voice low and even. "I simply provide it." Doctor's weathered face creased with a smile. "Philosophy still after all these years? Be careful who hears such thoughts." Marius nodded, pushing open the wooden door to his private quarters, a small privilege afforded to champions. He stopped abruptly. A figure huddled in the corner, draped in a pale stola, face obscured by a delicate veil. A woman. In the gladiator's quarters. "What is this?" he demanded, though his voice remained measured. The woman flinched but did not speak. Marius noticed a scroll on his sleeping pallet. He broke the wax seal bearing Senator Cassius's mark and read, "A gift for Rome's champion. Surely a man of your appetites deserves something unspoiled. Consider it appreciation from your admirers among the nobility. She's yours until morning." Marius crushed the parchment, understanding immediately. This was no gift, it was a calculated humiliation. A virgin in a gladiator's cell. By morning, her disgrace would be complete, and somehow, they would use this against him. The nobility always found ways to remind men like him of their place. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his distance. She remained silent, trembling. "I won't harm you," he said, setting aside his armor. "You have nothing to fear from me." The woman's shoulders tensed further. "I understand," Marius continued, pouring water into a basin. "You've been told what men like me do. What beasts we are." He washed his face and hands, the water turning pink. "But I was not always this." A knock interrupted them. The door swung open to reveal Bassus, the lanista who owned the ludus and all who fought within it. A heavy-set man with jeweled fingers and calculating eyes, he surveyed the scene with obvious disappointment. "Not started yet?" The message said she was delivered an hour ago. His gaze slid over the woman appraisingly. "Quality stock for a night's entertainment. Senator Cassius must be pleased with your performance today." "I prefer to clean the arena's filth from me first," Marius replied evenly. Bassus laughed. "Always the dignified one. Well, enjoy your reward. Such gifts don't come to gladiators often." He leaned closer. "And I expect you to enjoy it thoroughly. Senator Cassius will ask after his gift's reception." After Bassus left, Marius approached the woman slowly, as one might a wounded animal. "No one will touch you tonight," he said firmly. "You can take the pallet. I'll sleep on the floor." The veil shifted slightly as she raised her head. "Why?" The question was barely audible. Marius thought of his father, the philosopher whose political misstep had cost their family everything. He remembered the lessons taught beneath olive trees before the auction block separated them forever. "Because before I was this," he gestured to his scarred body, "I was educated in principles worth more than survival." He gathered spare linens to make a place for himself on the stone floor. "Rest," he said. Tomorrow I'll find a way to return you safely home. A bitter laugh escaped her. Home? There is none. This was not a random cruelty. I was chosen because I'm disposable. Marius recognized the tone. It matched the one in his own thoughts during his first years in the ludus. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, giving her space. Then we have something in common, he said quietly. Sleep. No harm will come to you in my quarters. As the night deepened, Marius stayed awake, watching the single oil lamp cast long shadows. The woman eventually succumbed to exhaustion, her breathing growing even. He observed her silhouette, wondering what chain of misfortunes had delivered her to this moment, and what consequences his unexpected compassion might bring to them both. The wooden medallion of Minerva rested in his palm. His father's words echoed, "Strength without wisdom is merely brutality." Perhaps, in this small defiance against cruelty, he could honor what remained of the man he was meant to be. Livia awoke to unfamiliar sounds. Metal against metal, men shouting commands, the rhythmic count of training drills. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before memories of the previous night crashed upon her like a wave. She clutched the rough blanket tighter, eyes darting around the sparse chamber. The gladiator was gone. His makeshift bed on the floor showed signs of use, but he had departed without waking her. Sunlight filtered through a small, high window, casting a rectangle of light on the packed earth floor. She touched her torn stola, once a garment of quality that marked her as belonging to a respectable household. Now it was as damaged as her prospects. 6 months ago, she had lived as the daughter of Gaius Livius, a merchant with connections to minor nobility. Then came the storm that sank his ships, the creditors, the sudden illness that took him to the grave. "You'll live with your uncle now," her mother had said through tears, already planning her own return to her brother's home in the countryside. Uncle Cassius, her father's half-brother, a senator with cold eyes who had never approved of his merchant relative. Livia smoothed the fabric of her stola. She had worn it to Senator Cassius's gathering the previous night, where she had served wine to his guests until he called her aside. "You're to deliver a message," he had said, his breath heavy with wine. "To the champion gladiator." She had not understood until the senator's wife appeared with the veil, draping it over Livia's head with practiced fingers and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Men like this animal need to be reminded of their place," the senator continued. "A virgin in his quarters, he'll rut like the beast he is, and by tomorrow, everyone will know how the great champion debased a citizen's niece. The disgrace will follow him into the arena." Livia had stood frozen as guards escorted her through dark streets to the ludus, where she was handed over to a bulbous-nosed man with gaudy rings. He had laughed, opened a door, and pushed her inside to await the gladiator's return. She had prepared herself for violence, for pain, for degradation. Instead, the imposing warrior had offered her his bed and slept on the floor. The door creaked open. Livia instinctively pressed herself against the wall, but it was only a young slave boy carrying a tray with bread, olives, and watered wine. "The champion said to bring you food," the boy said, setting down the tray before scurrying away. Livia approached the simple meal cautiously. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since midday yesterday. As she tore a piece of bread, the door opened again. The gladiator entered, his body gleaming with sweat from morning training. Without armor, she could see the map of scars that told his story, some puckered and old, others still pink with newness. He moved with contained power, like a tamed wolf that remembered being wild. "You're awake," he said, pouring water from a pitcher over his head and upper body. He remained near the door, giving her space. "Did you eat?" Livia nodded, clutching the bread. "Thank you." He reached for a cloth to dry himself. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Names had power. But what more could she lose? "Livia," she finally said. "Daughter of Gaius Livius." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "The merchant? I remember hearing of his ships. You know of my father?" "I wasn't born in the ludus," he said simply, reaching for a clean tunic. He turned away as he changed, offering her unexpected modesty. "Through this life, I knew of the world outside." "And you?" she asked. What are you called? Marius. He sat on a wooden stool, maintaining his distance. In the arena, they call me Marius the Unyielding. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Why am I here? She finally asked, though she knew the answer. Marius's jaw tightened. To punish us both. You for whatever you represent to them, me for daring to win the crowd's love despite my station. What happens now? I've asked Doctor to arrange passage for you to wherever you wish to go. Livia laughed bitterly. There is nowhere. My uncle, Senator Cassius, took me in after my father's death. I have no other family in Rome, no money, no protection. The senator is your uncle? Marius's expression darkened. And he would use you this way? I am nothing to him but another mouth to feed, another burden. This, she gestured to her torn stola, was a convenient solution. Marius stood abruptly, pacing the small room. Then we have a problem. Returning you to him isn't an option. Keeping you here? He shook his head. The ludus is no place for a woman. From outside came the sharp crack of a whip, followed by a cry of pain. Especially not a woman who was meant to be my victim, Marius added quietly. Their eyes met across the room, the gladiator and the merchant's daughter, both pawns in games played by powerful men, both searching for an escape that didn't exist. Dawn broke over the training grounds of the ludus with a violence that matched the activities within. Marius stood at the center of the sand circle, wooden practice sword in hand, facing down 3 opponents simultaneously. Sweat poured from his brow as he parried, struck, and spun with mechanical precision. Again, barked Doctor, his whip cracking near, but never touching Marius's feet. The 3 attackers circled, looking for openings. They were good, but Marius was better. He had spent 10 years learning how not to die. Your woman has made you slow, taunted Titus, the tallest of the 3, a Gaul with braided hair and a reputation for speed. Did she wear you out last night? Marius's face remained impassive as he blocked Titus's strike and countered with a blow that would have opened the man's gut had they been using real blades. Dead? Called Doctor, and Titus stepped back, acknowledging the hit. The remaining 2 pressed harder, sensing Marius's unusual intensity. He dispatched them with efficient movements that spoke of rage carefully controlled. Enough, Doctor finally said. Water, then shield drills. As the men dispersed, Marius caught sight of movement at the small window of his quarters. A flash of fabric, quickly withdrawn. Livia had been watching. Titus approached, offering a ladle of water. She's still there? The virgin's sacrifice. His tone was curious rather than mocking. Marius drank deeply before answering. She has nowhere else to go. Dangerous game, brother, Titus said quietly. Bassus expects you to use her and return her. The nobles expect a scandal. And what do you expect? Marius asked, studying his friend's face. Titus shrugged. I expect you to do something honorable and get us all in trouble. He grinned suddenly. But that's why we follow you, isn't it? Before Marius could respond, Bassus's distinctive bulk appeared at the edge of the training grounds. The lanista was deep in conversation with a richly dressed visitor, one of the wealthy men who sponsored games to curry public favor. The editor of the upcoming games, Titus whispered. Rumor says he's planning something spectacular for the summer solstice. Marius watched as Bassus gestured toward him, the editor's eyes narrowing appraisingly. He had been in the ludus long enough to recognize when he was being discussed as merchandise rather than a man. Doctor appeared at his side. Bassus wants you cleaned up and in his office. Now, what about training? This is business, Doctor said meaningfully. The kind that pays. As Marius rinsed the worst of the sand and sweat from his body, his mind circled back to the problem of Livia. Each hour she remained in his quarters increased the danger to them both. Bassus would expect her return soon, spoiled and subdued. Senator Cassius would demand evidence of her disgrace. Yet the thought of sending her back made his hand tighten around the wooden practice sword until his knuckles whitened. 15 minutes later, Marius stood before Bassus and the editor, a patrician named Gallus with the soft hands and sharp eyes of a man who made money from others' labor. My champion, Bassus said expansively. The pride of my ludus. I've watched your fights, Gallus said, circling Marius as if inspecting a horse. You have unusual technique for a gladiator. Almost educated. Marius kept his eyes forward. I adapt to survive. And survive you have, Gallus nodded. 10 years undefeated. Quite remarkable. What business brings you to us? Marius asked directly, earning a sharp look from Bassus. Gallus smiled thinly. I'm organizing the Solstice Games. Emperor's orders. They need to be memorable. And I want you as the main attraction. 3 special matches against champions from other provinces. The people love you, Marius the Unyielding. Your presence guarantees a full Colosseum. Bassus's eyes gleamed with avarice. My champion is expensive, but worth every sesterce. Gallus waved a dismissive hand. Money is no object when the emperor's reputation is at stake. Marius considered the opportunity. Special matches meant greater risk but also greater rewards. Rewards that might provide options he currently lacked. What payment would I receive? He asked, ignoring Bassus's frown at his directness. You. Gallus laughed. You are property, Gladiator. Your master receives the payment. My fighters receive a portion of their earnings, Bassus interjected smoothly. An incentive for survival. Marius met Gallus's gaze steadily. I want something specific. The editor raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what might that be? If I win all 3 matches, I want consideration for the rudis. The wooden sword of freedom. The traditional reward for gladiators who had proven their worth beyond question. Silence fell over the room. Bassus's face darkened, but Gallus looked intrigued. Bold request, the editor said finally. Very bold. But it would add drama to the games, wouldn't it? The champion fighting not just for glory but for freedom. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. I'll consider it. Provided the matches are everything I expect them to be. As Marius left the office, a plan began forming in his mind. If he could secure the promise of freedom for exceptional performance, perhaps he could negotiate for Livia as well. For the first time in years, Marius felt something dangerous stir within him. Hope Point 3 days had passed since Livia's arrival at the Ludus. 3 days of uncertain sanctuary in Marius's quarters, listening to the sounds of men training to kill or be killed. She had spent the time making herself useful, cleaning the small space, mending Marius's spare tunic with thread borrowed from Doctor, and staying out of sight whenever Bassus prowled nearby. Marius entered the room, his expression unusually determined. He carried a small leather pouch that clinked softly as he set it on the rough wooden table. What's that? Livia asked, looking up from the sandal strap she was repairing. Every coin I've saved over 10 years, he replied, loosening the pouch to reveal a modest collection of bronze and silver pieces. Not enough for what I need, but it's a start. What do you need it for? Marius sat heavily on the stool, fatigue evident in the set of his shoulders. Your contract. Livia's hand stilled. My contract? From your uncle. If I buy it, you'd belong to me instead of him. Seeing her expression, he quickly added, not as that. As a legal protection. I could then petition for your manumission. Freedom, she whispered, the concept almost foreign after months of effective imprisonment in her uncle's home. It won't be simple, Marius cautioned. Bassus would have to act as intermediary since I can't legally conduct business. And the price will be high, your uncle won't make it easy. Why would you do this? Livia asked, studying his face. You barely know me. Marius was silent for a moment, his fingers absently tracing a scar on his forearm. Because I remember what it was like being sold like livestock. Having your worth determined by someone else's greed. His eyes met hers. No one deserves that. Livia felt heat rise to her cheeks under his direct gaze. This man who killed for the entertainment of others possessed a moral clarity that shamed the nobles who cheered his violence. I have news, he continued. I've been selected for special matches at the Solstice Games. 3 fights against provincial champions. Is that good? It's dangerous, he admitted. But the reward could be substantial. I've asked for consideration for the rudis if I win all three. The wooden sword? Freedom? Livia leaned forward. They would grant this? The editor is considering it. For the drama, if nothing else. Marius's mouth twisted wryly. Romans love nothing more than a narrative with their bloodsport. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marius moved protectively in front of Livia before calling, "Enter." Bassus stepped into the small quarters, his expensive tunic at odds with the sparse surroundings. His eyes went immediately to Livia, then back to Marius with a calculating expression. "Still keeping her, I see," he remarked. "Senator Cassius has been asking after his niece. Says she never returned home after your victory celebration." "What do you want, Bassus?" Marius asked flatly. The lanista smiled, revealing wine-stained teeth. "I've come to discuss business. Private business." He glanced meaningfully at Livia. "She stays," Marius said. Bassus shrugged. "As you wish. It concerns her anyway." He settled his bulk against the doorframe. "Senator Cassius wants his property returned. I told him you've grown attached." "She's not property," Marius growled. "Everyone is property to someone, champion." Bassus examined his bejeweled fingers. "The question is merely one of price." Livia watched the exchange with growing unease. She was being bartered over like a cart of vegetables. "How much?" Marius asked, his voice tight. Bassus named a sum that made Livia gasp. It was more than most families saw in years. Marius didn't flinch. "I don't have that much." "No," Bassus agreed. "But you could earn it. The solstice games will pay handsomely." "Not that handsomely." "True," Bassus conceded with a predatory smile. "But I'm feeling generous. Win all 3 special matches and I'll consider the debt paid. I'll purchase her contract from the senator myself, then transfer it to you." Marius's eyes narrowed. "And my request for the rudis?" "One miracle at a time, champion." Bassus pushed away from the doorframe. "Think on it. The girl or your freedom. You might yet have both if the gods favor you, but I wouldn't count on divine intervention in the arena." After Bassus left, silence hung heavy between them. "You can't risk your life for me," Livia finally said. "I risk my life every time I step into the arena," Marius replied. "At least this time, it would be for something worthwhile." Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They were 2 pieces in a game played by powerful men, but for the first time, they were moving according to their own design. Livia reached across the table and placed her hand over his, the first time she had touched him. Voluntarily. "Teach me to defend myself," she said. "In case." She couldn't finish the thought. Marius nodded gravely, turning his palm up to clasp her smaller hand in his calloused one. "We begin tonight," he said. The invitation arrived on gilt-edged parchment, sealed with the emblem of the Senate. Bassus presented it to Marius with undisguised pleasure, the message clear. Tonight, Senator Cassius would host a gathering where selected gladiators would serve as entertainment, not in combat, but as exotic curiosities for wealthy Romans to examine and mock. "You'll attend," Bassus informed him. The senator specifically requested Rome's champion. Marius's face remained impassive, though his jaw tightened imperceptibly. "And what of the girl?" "Locked safely in your quarters." Bassus smiled thinly. "Unless you'd prefer I find her other accommodations during your absence?" "No," Marius answered quickly. "She stays where she is." As evening approached, Marius stood in his quarters, freshly bathed and dressed in a clean tunic that marked him as property of Bassus's ludus. Livia helped adjust the drape of the fabric across his shoulders. "You don't have to go," she said quietly. "I do." His voice was resigned. "Refusal would only bring punishment, not just to me." Livia's fingers lingered on the coarse cloth. "I know these gatherings. I served at them before." She paused. "They will try to humiliate you." "I'm aware." Marius turned to face her. In the weeks since her arrival, her color had improved, and the constant fear in her eyes had dimmed. "I spent my childhood in a philosopher's household. Before the arena, I learned to look beyond appearances to truth." "And what truth will sustain you tonight?" she asked. Marius considered this. "That their need to diminish me reveals their own smallness." His expression softened slightly. "Practice the defensive movements I showed you while I'm gone." After he departed with the other selected gladiators, Livia paced the small room, attempting the balanced stance Marius had taught her. Her mind, however, remained in Senator Cassius's villa, where she had spent months as an unwanted dependent after her father's death. She recalled the opulent triclinium where guests reclined on cushioned couches, the mosaic floor depicting Neptune's triumph, the silver dishes bearing delicacies from across the empire. Behind this facade of cultured wealth lay cruelty, slaves beaten for minor infractions, casual humiliations for sport, and her own status as little more than decorative property. Tonight, Marius would enter that world as an oddity, a dangerous animal temporarily leashed for the amusement of those who cheered his violence from safe distances. At Senator Cassius's villa, Marius stood stoically as perfumed patricians circled him, commenting on his scars as if he were marble statuary rather than flesh and blood. "Magnificent specimen," remarked an elderly senator, prodding Marius's arm with a bejeweled finger. "The musculature is extraordinary. What do you feed them, Bassus?" "A special diet of grain, meat, and wine," the Lannister replied proudly. "Expensive, but necessary for peak performance." "Like prized horses," laughed another guest, a young noble whose soft hands had never known labor. "Do they require the same breaking?" Marius kept his gaze fixed on the middle distance, a technique he had perfected in his early years at the Ludus. He allowed their words to wash over him without penetration, a mental armor as effective as the physical shield he carried in the arena. "Our champion grows restless," Senator Cassius interjected, approaching with a wine cup in hand. The resemblance to Livia was subtle but unmistakable in the arch of his brow and the set of his chin. "Perhaps he misses my niece's company?" Marius remained silent, though his pulse quickened. "Come now, Gladiator," Cassius continued, voice pitched to carry. "Surely you can spare a word about the virgin sent to your quarters? Was she satisfactory?" The gathered nobles quieted, anticipating scandal. Marius met Cassius's gaze directly, a breach of etiquette that caused several guests to gasp. "I have nothing to report, Senator," he replied evenly. "I treat all gifts with the respect they deserve." Cassius's eyes narrowed at the deliberate ambiguity. Before he could respond, a new arrival diverted attention. A young woman with Cassius's features but none of his coldness entered the atrium. Aurelia, the senator's daughter, moved through the crowd with practiced grace, acknowledging guests until she reached her father's side. "Father, you promised this gathering would be a philosophical discussion," she said, eyeing the gladiators with evident disapproval. "Not a display of human property." "Philosophy bores our guests, daughter," Cassius replied dismissively. "Besides, these men are hardly human in the proper sense." Aurelia's gaze met Marius's briefly, unexpected compassion in her expression. "Perhaps true humanity is revealed not by birth but by action," she suggested, before moving to greet other guests. As the evening progressed, Marius positioned himself near conversations, gathering information like a general surveying battlefield terrain. He learned of rivalries between noble houses, political ambitions, and, most crucially, rumors of manipulation in the upcoming solstice games. "The Egyptian is undefeated in Alexandria," one merchant told another over wine. "Gallus has arranged his transfer at great expense specifically to challenge the unyielding one." "A spectacle worth attending," his companion agreed. "Though I hear certain wagers have already been placed on the outcome." "The odds are being managed," came the knowing reply. "Senator Cassius has particular interest in seeing Rome's champion finally fall." Marius filed this intelligence away, understanding now the greater game unfolding. His freedom and Livia's safety depended on victories that powerful men had already decided should not occur. Marius returned to the Ludus well past midnight, his composure finally cracking once the heavy wooden gate closed behind him. His shoulders slumped as he made his way through the silent corridors, the weight of the evening's humiliations and discoveries pressing upon him like physical burdens. When he pushed open the door to his quarters, he found Livia awake, seated on his pallet, a small clay oil lamp casting wavering shadows across her concerned face. "You're back," she said softly, rising to her feet. Then, noticing his expression, "What happened?" Marius shook his head, moving to the water basin to wash the scent of perfumed nobles from his skin. "Nothing unexpected. I played my part, the tamed beast for their amusement." Livia approached hesitantly, taking a cloth and dipping it in the water. "Your knuckles are bleeding." He looked down, surprised to see raw skin where he had apparently clenched his fists too tightly for too long. "It's nothing." "Let me," she insisted gently, taking his large hand in her smaller ones. As she cleaned the minor wounds, she asked, "Did you see my uncle?" "Yes." Marius watched her methodical care, her touch surprisingly sure. "He asked about you." Livia's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing that would satisfy his curiosity." Marius managed a tired smile. "I believe I confused him." She finished binding his knuckles with a strip of clean linen. "Good." Marius reached for the simple clay cup on the small table, pouring watered wine for them both. "I learned something important tonight. The games are being arranged against me. Your uncle has a particular interest in seeing me defeated." "That doesn't surprise me," Livia said, accepting the cup. "My uncle destroys whatever he cannot control. And you, by refusing to dishonor me, defied his expectations." They sat side by side on the edge of the pallet, an intimacy that would have been unthinkable when she first arrived but now felt natural, even necessary. "I was sent to you as part of a larger plan," Livia admitted after a long silence. "I overheard conversations in my uncle's house. He's heavily invested in the games, not just for prestige, but financially. Your defeats or victories affect his fortunes directly. And my unbroken victory streak has become inconvenient," Marius concluded. Livia nodded. "I was meant to be a distraction. To compromise your focus, your reputation." She stared into her cup. "I didn't realize it fully until the night they sent me here. I was just another tool to be used and discarded." "You're more than that," Marius said firmly. "You always were." Their eyes met in the flickering lamplight, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. "Tell me about your life before," she asked. "You mentioned a philosopher's household." Marius leaned back against the wall, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "My father was Lucius Marius Secundus, a teacher of Stoic philosophy with a small but respected school outside Rome." "I've heard that name," Livia said, surprised. "My father mentioned him. He wrote commentaries on Zeno's teachings." Marius nodded, something like pride flickering across his features. "He believed in living by principle, not merely teaching it. When Emperor Sulla's purges began, he spoke out against the injustice." "A dangerous position," Livia murmured. "Fatal, as it turned out. Not just for him, but for our entire household." Marius's voice remained steady, though his eyes reflected old pain. "I was 15 when the soldiers came. My mother had died years before. My father was executed as an example. I was sold to the ludus to pay his debts to the state." "I'm sorry," Livia said simply, placing her hand over his bandaged one. "Doctor found me trying to kill myself that first night," Marius continued, his voice distant with memory. "He stopped me, told me there were better ways to die if that's what I wanted. In the arena, at least, death had meaning. It entertained Rome. But you didn't die." "No. I discovered I had talent for survival. And eventually for killing." He met her gaze directly. "Does that frighten you? Knowing what I've become?" Livia considered the question seriously, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand. "I've seen cruelty in silk robes and cruelty in armor. The difference is that you never chose this path." Her voice strengthened. "What frightens me is that my uncle and men like him have the power to turn a philosopher's son into a weapon for their entertainment." The simple honesty of her answer pierced something in Marius that had been armored for a decade. Without thinking, he reached up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "We are both what Rome has made us," he said softly. "But perhaps we don't have to remain so." Livia leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she looked at him again, there was resolve in her gaze. "Then we fight," she said. "Not in the arena, but in the game they've created. We use their rules against them." Marius felt something long dormant stir within him, not just hope, but purpose. He had fought for a decade to survive. Now, for the first time, he had something worth fighting for. The Colosseum pulsed with the energy of 70,000 spectators, their collective anticipation a living force that pressed against the stone walls and vibrated through the wooden floor of the arena. Banners snapped in the summer breeze, and vendors hawked wine and figs to the restless crowd as they awaited the main event of the day. In the preparation chamber beneath the arena, Marius stood motionless as Doctor checked his armor one final time, adjusting straps and testing the weight of his gladius. The familiar ritual calmed him, focusing his mind on the task ahead. "The Gaul is quick," Doctor murmured, his voice pitched for Marius's ears alone. "He likes to feint left but strikes from the right. Watch his footwork." Marius nodded once, eyes fixed on the stone wall before him. "Any word on tampering?" "Nothing obvious," Doctor replied, "but that doesn't mean they haven't tried. Trust nothing. Test your footing with each step." From the tunnel came the sound of trumpets announcing the preliminary matches had concluded. Soon, it would be his turn to face the first of his 3 special opponents. "One more thing," Doctor said, pressing something into Marius's palm. "From the girl." Marius looked down to find a small carved wooden disc, not his medallion of Minerva, but a new token. Upon it, Livia had etched a simple design, a house with an open door. A symbol of the future they dared not speak of aloud. "She worked on it all morning," Doctor added, a rare smile softening his weathered face. "Used my knife when she thought I wasn't looking." Marius closed his fingers around the token, the wood warm against his skin. "Keep her safe if I don't return." "You'll return," Doctor said firmly. "You're not fighting just for yourself anymore." The waiting was always the worst part. Marius had learned over the years to enter a state of detached readiness, his body relaxed but alert, his mind clear of everything but survival. Today, however, Livia's face kept appearing in his thoughts, her quiet strength, her unexpected resilience, the way she had begun to look at him not as a killer but as a man. The herald's voice boomed from above, announcing the special match. The crowd roared in response, their fervor intensifying as Marius's name echoed through the massive structure. He tucked Livia's token securely beneath his armor, took a deep breath, and stepped toward the light. The ascent into the arena always felt like a journey between worlds, from the shadowed, confined spaces below to the vast, brutal theater above. As Marius emerged into sunlight, the crowd's reaction washed over him like a physical wave. Some cheered, some booed, all united in their hunger for spectacle. Across the sand stood his opponent, Brennus, champion of Gaul, tall and lean with intricate blue patterns painted across his chest and arms. He carried a curved blade and a small round shield, his fighting style known for speed rather than power. The editor of the games, Gallus, sat in the place of honor beside Senator Cassius and other dignitaries. Marius noted the exchange of glances between them, the barely concealed anticipation. They expected him to fail. The signal was given. Marius and Brennus circled each other, testing, assessing. The Gaul moved fluidly, his footwork precise as he feinted and withdrew, looking for openings. Marius remained defensive, his shield positioned to protect his vital areas while he studied his opponent's patterns. Brennus grew bolder with each exchange, his confidence building as Marius appeared to struggle with his speed. Then it happened. A subtle shift in the sand beneath Marius's right foot, an unevenness that shouldn't exist on a properly prepared arena floor. He adjusted instantly, recognizing the trap. When Brennus lunged, targeting the spot where Marius should have lost his balance, he met only air as Marius pivoted away. The crowd gasped at the near miss, then roared as Marius launched his first genuine attack, forcing Brennus back across the sand. Their weapons clashed, sparks flying from metal striking metal. The sound rang out across the arena, punctuated by the collective voice of the spectators urging blood. Brennus was good, perhaps the most skilled opponent Marius had faced in years. But there was a predictability to his technique that betrayed formal training rather than the desperate innovation born of true survival. They separated, breathing heavily, circling again. Marius felt a familiar clarity descend upon him, the world narrowing to the space between himself and his opponent, time slowing to reveal opportunities invisible to untrained eyes. When Brennus attacked again, Marius was ready. He blocked the curved blade with his shield, stepped inside the Gaul's guard, and drove his gladius upward in a precise thrust that should have ended the fight. But his blade met unexpected resistance. Concealed beneath the decorative paint on Brennus's chest was a metal plate, a violation of the match's terms. The Gaul grinned, revealing teeth filed to points, and launched a counterattack that sent Marius stumbling backward. In the stands, Senator Cassius leaned forward eagerly. In the preparation chamber below, Livia pressed her hands to her mouth, watching through a small grate that offered limited view of the arena. Marius regained his footing, reassessing. The match was indeed rigged, but not in the way he had expected. His opponent wasn't just skilled, he was cheating with the obvious blessing of the officials. Very well. If Rome wanted a spectacle, he would give them one worthy of remembering. Discarding conventional technique, Marius attacked with the unpredictable fury that had earned him his reputation. He drove Brennus back step by step, using not just his weapons but every part of his body as a tool of combat. When the Gaul attempted to exploit the uneven footing, Marius used it to his advantage, deliberately stumbling to draw his opponent in before countering with devastating precision. The end came suddenly. Brennus, frustrated by Marius's adaptability, overextended on an attack. Marius caught the Gaul's arm, twisted, and sent him crashing face-first into the sand. Before Brennus could recover, Marius's gladius rested against his neck. The arena fell silent. All eyes turned to Gallus for the verdict. The editor hesitated, glancing at Senator Cassius's thunderous expression before raising his hand with thumb extended horizontally. The decision left to the crowd's mercy. The crowd's verdict came in a thunderous wave of approval, thumbs up rippling across the Colosseum like wind through summer wheat. Marius stepped back, lowering his gladius as Brennus struggled to his feet. Honor had been satisfied, there was no need for death today. As arena slaves rushed forward to escort the defeated Gaul away, Marius raised his weapons in the traditional salute to the spectators. Their adulation washed over him, meaningless except for the political capital it represented in his quest for freedom. He scanned the dignitaries' box, noting Senator Cassius's barely concealed displeasure and Gallus's calculating expression. The editor of the game stood, raising his hands for silence. "Romans," Gallus called out, his voice carrying across the arena. "You have witnessed the first of 3 special matches featuring our champion, Marius the Unyielding." Fresh cheers erupted. Return in 3 days for the second contest, where greater challenges await. Marius was escorted back to the preparation chambers below, where Doctor waited with a skin of water and a cloth to wipe away blood and sand. "Well fought," the older man said gruffly. "You recognize the plate beneath his paint?" "Not soon enough," Marius admitted, wincing as Doctor examined a deep cut on his shoulder. "There will be worse tricks in the next match." "No doubt." Doctor's experienced fingers probed the wound. "This needs stitching." "Come, the medicus is waiting." As they moved through the underground corridors, Bassus appeared, his face flushed with the exhilaration of profitable victory. "My champion!" he exclaimed, clapping Marius on his uninjured shoulder. "Magnificent performance. The crowd adores you." "The sand was tampered with," Marius said flatly, "and my opponent wore concealed armor." Bassus waved a dismissive hand. "Details. You prevailed as I knew you would." "Gallus is impressed, he's added a bonus to your winnings." "My winnings or yours?" Marius asked, though he already knew the answer. "Mine, naturally," Bassus chuckled. "But I'm feeling generous. Complete the 3rd match with equal success, and we'll discuss that contract you're so concerned about." Later, cleaned and stitched, Marius returned to his quarters where Livia waited anxiously. Her face brightened at the sight of him, then clouded with concern as she noted the fresh bandages. "You're hurt," she said, rising quickly from where she'd been seated. "It's nothing serious," he assured her. "The medicus says it will heal cleanly." Livia approached, her fingers hovering near but not touching the bandaged shoulder. "I watched through the grate. When you stumbled, I thought—" She stopped, composing herself. "You were magnificent." "I survived," Marius corrected. "That's all it was." "No," she insisted. "It was more. The way you fought, there was grace in it. Purpose." Marius smiled faintly. "The wooden token you made. It helped." Color rose in Livia's cheeks. "It was presumptuous." "It was perfect," he interrupted gently. "A reminder of why the fight matters." The moment stretched between them, intimate and fragile. Marius was acutely aware of how close she stood, of the subtle scent of herbs that clung to her since she had begun helping the ludus cook with meal preparations. A knock at the door broke the spell. Titus entered without waiting for permission, his expression animated. "The Lanista has granted us market privileges tomorrow," he announced. "A reward for today's victory. We're allowed into the city, under guard of course." "All of us?" Marius asked. "Those who fought today." Titus glanced at Livia. "And companions are permitted." After Titus departed, Livia turned to Marius with cautious excitement. "The city? I haven't been beyond these walls since I arrived." "It could be dangerous," Marius warned. "Your uncle's men might be watching." "I've been hidden away long enough," she replied with unexpected firmness. Besides, few would recognize the senator's niece dressed as a gladiator's woman. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Livia wore a simple stola borrowed from the ludus cook, her hair covered with a plain cloth in the manner of common women. With guards positioned at the front and rear of their small group, they passed through the ludus gates into the teeming streets of Rome. The city assaulted the senses, the calls of merchants, the stench of tanneries, the colorful fabrics in market stalls, the press of bodies moving in endless currents through narrow streets. After weeks confined to the ludus, even Marius felt momentarily overwhelmed by the sensory barrage. Livia walked close beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the bustling scene. "Where shall we go first?" she asked. "Food," Marius decided, guiding her toward a row of stalls selling fresh bread and olives. "Then perhaps some herbs for your cooking." As they moved through the market, Marius became aware of the stares they attracted. Not from recognition, he wore a plain tunic without ludus markings, but from the incongruity of his scarred, muscular frame among ordinary citizens. The brand of the gladiator was burned into more than just his flesh. It was visible in his posture, his vigilance, the way people instinctively cleared a path before him. At a stall selling dried herbs and spices, Livia bargained confidently with the merchant, revealing glimpses of her upbringing as a merchant's daughter. She selected rosemary, thyme, and precious saffron, creating a small bundle of fragrant stems. "These will improve those bland stews they serve," she said with satisfaction as they moved away from the stall. "You've made yourself essential to the cook," Marius observed. "Soon the entire ludus will revolt if you're taken away." Livia smiled, a rare expression that transformed her face. "A different strategy than yours, but effective in its way." They purchased a basket of fresh figs and found a stone bench near a small temple where they could rest and observe the flowing life of the city. For a moment, they might have been any couple enjoying the market day, if one ignored the guards standing at a discreet distance and the way Marius positioned himself to scan for threats. "I used to come here with my father," Livia said softly, watching a group of children chase each other through the marketplace. "He taught me to judge the quality of goods, to negotiate fair prices. He believed commerce was a form of philosophy, an exchange requiring honor from both parties." "He sounds like a good man," Marius said. "He was." Livia's fingers brushed against his on the bench. "What would you do? If we succeed, if you win the ludus and I'm freed from my uncle's control?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither had dared voice aloud. Before Marius could answer Livia's question about their future, commotion erupted in the marketplace. A group of men in expensive tunics shoved through the crowd, the insignia of Senator Cassius visible on their cloaks. Marius tensed, placing himself between Livia and the approaching men. "Time to return," he said quietly, rising from the bench. "Stay close." They moved swiftly through the throng, Marius guiding Livia with a light touch at her back. The Ludus guards noticed the disturbance and closed ranks around their charges, hands resting on sword hilts. "What is it?" Livia whispered. "Your uncle's men," Marius replied, scanning for an exit route. "They haven't seen us yet, but we shouldn't tempt fate." They slipped down a narrow side street, the sounds of the market fading behind them. Marius knew Rome's labyrinthine layout from his youth, before the arena claimed him. He led their small group through increasingly narrow passages until they emerged near the Forum, where they could blend with the crowd of citizens conducting daily business. "We should return to the Ludus," one guard suggested nervously. "Bassus will have our hides if anything happens to his champion before the next match." "Soon," Marius agreed. "First, a short detour." He guided them to a small temple dedicated to Fortuna, its modest facade overshadowed by grander structures nearby. Inside, cool shadows offered respite from the summer heat and prying eyes. "Wait here," he told the guards, who positioned themselves at the entrance. Taking Livia's hand, Marius approached the simple altar where a stone image of the goddess stood serenely. He drew a copper coin from his belt, a token sum from his meager allowance, and placed it in the offering bowl. "For luck?" Livia asked softly. "For change," Marius corrected. "Fortune governs not just luck but transformation." Livia reached into the folds of her stola and produced a small sprig of rosemary from her market purchases, adding it to Marius's offering. "For remembrance," she explained. "So she doesn't forget us." They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet of the temple enveloping them like a protective cloak. In this brief sanctuary, the arena and Senator Cassius seemed distant concerns rather than imminent threats. "We should go," Marius finally said, though reluctance colored his voice. As they turned to leave, a hooded figure slipped into the temple, moving directly toward them with purpose. Marius pushed Livia behind him, his body instantly alert. "Peace, Gladiator," a feminine voice murmured as the figure raised delicate hands to lower her hood. "I mean no harm." Aurelia, Senator Cassius's daughter, stood before them, her patrician features composed but her eyes darting nervously to the entrance where the guards remained unaware of her presence. "Lady Aurelia," Livia gasped. "What are you?" "There isn't much time," Aurelia interrupted. "My father's men are searching the market for you. They have orders to bring you back to our villa, Livia." She turned to Marius. "And they've been instructed to ensure you miss your next match." Marius studied her warily. "Why tell us this? Why help?" A complicated emotion crossed Aurelia's face. "Because I know what it's like to be my father's pawn." She straightened her shoulders. "And because what he did, sending Livia to you as a cruel joke, crossed a line I cannot ignore." "How did you find us?" Livia asked. "I followed my father's men. When they began searching the market, I guessed where you might have gone." Aurelia glanced toward the entrance again. "But that's not important. What matters is what I overheard last night. They're planning to poison your weapons before the next match." Marius's expression hardened. "How?" "A substance on the blade, slow-acting but debilitating. It won't kill you immediately, but it will ensure you lose, spectacularly." Aurelia reached into her cloak and produced a small vial. "This is the antidote. My father keeps it in case of accidents." "You borrowed it." Livia accepted the vial, her fingers trembling slightly. "Aurelia, if he discovers you've helped us." "He won't," Aurelia said with grim certainty. "I'm to be married next month to a wealthy merchant in Athens. My father won't look too closely at my activities until then, as long as I appear properly demure at public functions." Marius studied the senator's daughter with new respect. "Why risk yourself for us?" Aurelia's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing a flash of suppressed anger. "Because I've spent my life watching my father destroy people for his amusement and profit. Because Livia was kind to me when we were children, before her father's disgrace." She took a steadying breath. And because sometimes, just sometimes, I want to believe that those with power don't always win." Shouts from outside indicated the search was moving closer to the temple. "You must go," Aurelia urged. "Take the service passage behind the altar. It leads to the street near the ludus." As they prepared to flee, Livia impulsively embraced her former friend. "Thank you," she whispered. Aurelia returned the embrace briefly before stepping back. "Be careful with the antidote. A few drops in wine before the match, no more. Too much could be as dangerous as the poison itself." After Aurelia departed, Marius and Livia hurried through the hidden passage, the guards following reluctantly. The vial of antidote, small enough to fit in Livia's closed palm, represented something precious, not just protection against poison, but evidence that they weren't entirely alone in their struggle. Back at the ludus, Livia carefully concealed the vial beneath a loose stone in the floor of Marius's quarters. Neither spoke of what had happened, aware that walls had ears and trust was a luxury they couldn't afford beyond each other. That night, as Marius performed his usual pre-match rituals, checking his armor, visualizing combat sequences, Livia sat nearby, grinding herbs with a small stone mortar borrowed from the kitchen. "What are you making?" he asked, pausing in his preparations. "A healing poultice for after your match," she replied, her eyes meeting his meaningfully. "And something to keep in the arena, just in case." The day of the second match dawned hot and windless, the air hanging heavy over Rome like a woolen blanket. By mid-morning, the Colosseum was already packed with spectators seeking distraction from the oppressive heat, their excitement building with each preliminary contest. In the preparation chamber, Marius stood motionless as Doctor applied oil to his skin, the familiar ritual a counterpoint to the tension coiling within him. Nearby, other gladiators prepared for their own matches, the chamber filled with the sounds of metal on metal and muttered prayers to various gods. "The Egyptian arrived yesterday," Doctor said quietly as he worked. "They're calling him the Desert Serpent. No one has seen him fight, but the rumors are concerning." "All opponents are concerning until they bleed," Marius replied, his voice steady despite the dryness in his throat. Earlier, he had consumed the antidote mixed with wine, as Aurelia had instructed. The bitter taste still lingered on his tongue. Doctor's weathered hands paused on Marius's shoulder. "Be careful with this one. The regular rules, they may not apply." Before Marius could respond, Livia appeared at the chamber entrance, escorted by a guard. Her presence here, in this masculine domain, drew stares and muttered comments, but she kept her eyes fixed on Marius as she approached. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though there was no rebuke in his tone. "I needed to give you this," she replied, pressing something into his palm, a small leather pouch on a cord. "Wear it against your skin." Marius raised an eyebrow in question. "Herbs that counteract poison," she explained softly. "If your wounds start burning more than they should, break it open on the cut." He nodded, slipping the cord around his neck and tucking the pouch beneath his armor. Their fingers brushed briefly, the contact sending unexpected warmth through his battle-ready frame. "Be safe," Livia whispered, then stepped back as trumpets announced the approaching main event. "I need this victory," Marius told Doctor as Livia was escorted away. "Not just for the crowd." The old trainer nodded gravely. "Then take it, champion. Whatever it costs." Emerging into the arena was like stepping into a furnace. The sun beat down mercilessly, reflecting off the sand that already showed dark patches from earlier contests. The crowd's roar washed over Marius as he raised his gladius in salute, the familiar choreography of the arena grounding him in the moment. Across the sand stood his opponent. The Egyptian was tall and lean, his dark skin gleaming with oil, his head completely shaven. He carried a curved khopesh in one hand and a distinctive rectangular shield in the other, his fighting style clearly foreign to Roman techniques. In the official's box, Gallus rose to introduce the special match, his voice carrying across the arena. Beside him sat Senator Cassius, his expression coolly anticipatory, and a cluster of nobles whose heavy wagers rested on the outcome. As the signal to begin was given, Marius circled cautiously, testing the sand with each step. The Egyptian mirrored his movements with serpentine grace, his eyes never blinking, his breathing controlled and even. The first exchange came suddenly. The Egyptian lunged with unexpected speed, his curved blade slashing toward Marius's neck. Marius deflected the blow with his shield, countering with a thrust that the Egyptian evaded with a fluid twist of his body. They separated, reassessing. The crowd murmured appreciatively at the display of skill. This would be no quick victory for either man. The pattern continued: attack, defense, counter, retreat, each fighter testing the other's technique while revealing little of their own full capability. Marius recognized the Egyptian's strategy. It mirrored his own patience, the willingness to extend combat until weaknesses emerged. Midway through the match, sweat pouring from both men, Marius finally saw an opening. The Egyptians' footwork, while impressive, followed a predictable pattern on defensive retreats. Marius pressed an attack, deliberately exposing his right side as bait. The Egyptian took the opportunity, his khopesh flashing in the sunlight as it sliced across Marius's ribs. The cut was shallow but stung sharply, more sharply than it should have. The poison. Marius stumbled, his reaction only partially feigned. The crowd gasped as blood appeared on his side, spreading slowly across his skin. In the dignitaries' box, Senator Cassius leaned forward expectantly. The Egyptian pressed his advantage, sensing victory within reach. As he moved in for the decisive strike, Marius broke the herbal pouch against his wound, the pungent mixture burning as it entered his bloodstream. For a moment his vision blurred, his limbs heavy with the competing effects of poison and antidote. The Egyptian's blade came toward him again, and Marius barely raised his shield in time. Then, like a wave receding from shore, the heaviness began to lift. Clarity returned, along with a surge of cold anger. They had tried to rob him not just of victory but of his future, the freedom he fought for, the life with Livia he dared not fully imagine. With renewed focus, Marius changed tactics, abandoning the measured approach for something more primal. He attacked with controlled fury, driving the surprised Egyptian backward across the sand. Each blow carried the weight of 10 years of survival, each parry the precision of a man who refused to lose what he had never truly possessed: choice. The end came with shocking suddenness. The Egyptian, unused to retreating, caught his heel on an uneven section of sand. As he struggled to maintain balance, Marius struck, not with his gladius but with his shield, smashing it into the Egyptian's chest with all his strength. The impact sent the Egyptian sprawling. Before he could recover, Marius was upon him, blade at his throat, knee pinning his weapon arm. Silence fell over the Colosseum as all eyes turned to Gallus. The editor of the games hesitated, his gaze flickering to Senator Cassius, whose face had darkened with barely contained rage. Slowly, deliberately, Gallus extended his arm, thumb held horizontally. The crowd's verdict would decide the Egyptian's fate. The crowd's mercy proved as fickle as Roman weather. Thumbs turned downward across the Colosseum, condemning the Egyptian to death. Marius met his opponent's dark eyes, seeing in them neither fear nor pleading, only the dignified resignation of a warrior who understood the arena's brutal covenant. Before Marius could deliver the fatal stroke, a commotion erupted in the official's box. Gallus stood suddenly, arms raised to halt the execution. "People of Rome," the editor called out. "In honor of the emperor's upcoming visit, I grant this fighter life. Let it be known that Rome's games are not merely about death, but the glory of combat itself." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some disappointed, others approving of this show of imperial magnanimity. Marius stepped back, relieved to be spared adding another death to his conscience. The Egyptian nodded once in solemn acknowledgement before being led away by arena attendants. That evening, in the relative privacy of his quarters, Marius sat still as Livia carefully cleaned and dressed his wounds. The cut along his ribs had begun to turn an angry purple at the edges, clear evidence of the poison that would have felled him without intervention. "The herbs worked," she observed, applying a fragrant salve to the inflamed skin. "As did the antidote," Marius agreed. "Though the combination left me disoriented for a moment." Livia's fingers paused on his skin. "I worried it might be too much. Mixing remedies can be unpredictable." "It was worth the risk." Marius captured her hand in his, holding it against his wounded side. One more victory, Livia. One more, and we have a chance at freedom. She met his gaze, her expression a complex mixture of hope and fear. Do you truly believe Bassus will honor his word? That we could leave this place? Instead of answering immediately, Marius reached beneath his sleeping pallet and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a crude ring fashioned from a broken piece of his armor, iron bent laboriously into a circle, its surface polished to a dull sheen. What is this? Livia asked, though the question was merely a whisper. A promise, Marius replied, holding the makeshift ring between them. If we gain our freedom, when we gain our freedom, I would make you my wife. Not just for protection or convenience, but because these weeks have shown me what I want beyond survival. He paused, suddenly uncertain. If you would have me. Livia stared at the simple iron ring, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You would bind yourself to me? A penniless merchant's daughter with nothing to offer? You have offered me purpose, Marius said quietly. Before you came, I fought only to live another day. Now I fight for a future I can almost see. With trembling fingers, Livia took the ring, slipping it onto the cord that held her father's old merchant seal, the only possession she had managed to keep through her ordeal. Yes, she said simply. Though the gods alone know what life we might build, I would face it with you. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious, until a sharp knock at the door shattered their privacy. Doctor entered without waiting for permission, his weathered face grim. Bassus wants you, he told Marius. Now. In the Lanista's opulent office, Bassus lounged on a couch imported from Greece, a cup of undiluted wine in his bejeweled hand. The contrast between his luxury and the Spartan conditions of his fighters never failed to stir resentment in Marius's chest. My champion returns triumphant again, Bassus declared, raising his cup in mock salute. Despite unexpected complications. The poison you mean, Marius replied bluntly. Bassus's eyebrows rose in feigned surprise. Poison? What an alarming accusation. Perhaps the Egyptian's blade was ceremonially treated. Those foreigners have strange customs. Strange indeed that Senator Cassius would know of such customs in advance. The Lanista's expression hardened. Careful, Gladiator. Some thoughts are best left unspoken. He set down his wine cup. I didn't summon you to discuss conspiracies. Your final opponent has arrived in Rome. Who is it? The Thracian butcher, Bassus replied with evident satisfaction. 30 victories, no defeats. Specialized in execution matches, no mercy given or expected. Marius had heard the name whispered among gladiators, a fighter of legendary brutality who left no opponents alive regardless of the crowd's verdict. The match is to the death, Bassus continued. Gallus was most insistent. The emperor expects a spectacular finale to the games. He studied Marius with calculating eyes. You understand what this means? That our arrangement has changed, Marius said, unsurprised. Again. Bassus shrugged expansively. Business is fluid, champion. But I'm not unreasonable. Survive this final match, truly a feat if you manage it, and I'll grant you both freedom and the girl's contract. Your word on this? Before witnesses? So formal, Bassus chuckled. But yes, I'll have documents prepared. Kill the Thracian, and you'll have your freedom and your woman. His smile turned predatory. Assuming, of course, that you survive. Back in his quarters, Marius found Livia waiting anxiously. Without preamble, he told her of the changed terms and his final opponent. It's a death trap, she said when he finished, fear evident in her voice. This Thracian, they've chosen him specifically to kill you. Likely, Marius acknowledged, sitting beside her on the edge of the pallet. But I've faced death before. Not like this, Livia insisted. Not against someone selected purely for his ability to ensure you never leave the arena alive. Her fingers closed around the iron ring hanging from her cord. We need another plan. Marius took her hand in his. Whatever happens in the arena, Livia, know this. Meeting you has given meaning to years that held none. If these are my final days, I count them well spent. Don't, she whispered fiercely. Don't speak of final days. She pressed her forehead against his. We will find another way. Together. While Marius trained with doubled intensity for his final match, Livia formulated a plan of her own. Using the relative freedom she had gained as the champion's woman, she approached Doctor with a carefully composed request. I need to send a message, she said, watching the old trainer's face for any sign of betrayal. To someone who might help us. Doctor continued sharpening the practice swords, his scarred hands moving with practiced precision. Help with what exactly? An alternative path to freedom. Livia lowered her voice. You know as well as I do that the Thracian was chosen specifically to kill Marius. The whetstone paused momentarily against steel. And who is this potential ally? Aurelia, Senator Cassius's daughter. Doctor looked up sharply. You would trust the blood of your enemy? She's the one who warned us about the poison, Livia explained. She has sympathies that differ from her father's. After a long, considering silence, Doctor nodded once. Write your message. I'll see it delivered. But be careful what you commit to parchment. Some things are better left unwritten. That evening, as Livia watched Marius methodically prepare his armor for the coming battle, she felt the weight of her secret plan like a stone in her chest. She had not told him of her message to Aurelia, fearing he would forbid such a risk. The Thracian fights with two short swords, Marius said, testing the edge of his gladius. He's known for attacking from unusual angles. How do you know this? Livia asked, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. Titus. He's been gathering information from other Ludus fighters. Marius set the blade aside. Knowledge is as important as strength in the arena. Livia moved behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders, feeling the knotted tension in his muscles. You carry too much weight, she murmured, beginning to knead the hard flesh. It's the life I was given, he replied, though he leaned back into her touch. But not the one you must keep. Her fingers worked methodically, finding and releasing points of constriction. There are other paths to freedom besides the arena. Marius turned to face her, his expression serious. What are you planning, Livia? Before she could respond, a light tap at their door announced Doctor. His face gave away nothing as he handed Livia a small scroll sealed with plain wax. A response to your inquiry, he said simply, then withdrew. Marius's questioning gaze followed the scroll as Livia broke the seal and read the brief message within. Her breath caught. What is it? He demanded. A possibility, she replied, handing him the parchment. The message was brief but clear. The Praetor Marcus oversees manumission petitions. He has sympathy for gladiators, having once been ransomed from pirates himself. Approach him with proper documentation and sufficient coin, and he might consider your case regardless of the arena's outcome. Tomorrow at midday, the herb market near the forum. I will escort you. You contacted the senator's daughter? Marius asked, his voice carefully controlled. Without telling me? I needed to explore every option, Livia replied, refusing to look away from his intense gaze. Your death in the arena serves everyone's purpose except ours. And you trust this Aurelia? The daughter of the man who orchestrated our predicament. I trust her desire to defy her father, Livia said. And I trust that not everyone in Rome is corrupt. Marius paced the small confines of their quarters, the scroll crushed in his fist. It's too dangerous. If you're caught outside the Ludus, if the senator's men find you, then what? Livia interrupted, a new steel in her voice. I return to my uncle's house to be married off to whichever ally needs securing? I become a slave in truth rather than just in circumstance. She stepped closer to him. I refuse to simply wait for fate to decide our future. The conviction in her eyes gave Marius pause. This was not the frightened woman who had arrived trembling in his quarters weeks ago. Experience had hardened her, as surely as the arena had hardened him. Even if you reach this praetor, he said finally, what documentation could possibly secure my freedom? I am property, legally bound to Bassus. Every transaction in Rome leaves a record, Livia replied. My father taught me that much. If we can prove that your original sale was conducted improperly, or that you've earned your freedom through extraordinary service. Documentation that convenient doesn't simply appear, Marius pointed out. No, Livia agreed. It must be created or altered. Understanding dawned in Marius's eyes. You're suggesting forgery, a crime punishable by death. I'm suggesting we use Rome's obsession with legality against itself. Livia took his hands in hers. While you fight in the arena, I'll fight in the forum. Between us, perhaps one path will lead to freedom. After long deliberation, Marius nodded. Tomorrow then. But you don't go alone. Titus will accompany you. He can move through the city without raising suspicion. The next day, disguised in a plain brown cloak borrowed from the Ludus cook, Livia slipped out through the servants' entrance with Titus following at a discreet distance. The herb market near the forum buzzed with midday activity, merchants calling their wares, customers haggling over prices, and street performers entertaining the crowd for scattered coins. Aurelia was waiting as promised, her own identity concealed beneath a modest stola that belied her patrician status. Without speaking, she guided Livia through the crowded streets to a quiet building near the edge of the forum. Praetor Marcus holds public hearings here twice a week, Aurelia explained in hushed tones. He's known for his fairness, even to those without political influence. And he'll see us? Without appointment? Livia asked. I've arranged it, Aurelia replied. My father's name still opens certain doors, even when he doesn't know it's being invoked. Inside, they were led to a small antechamber where a middle-aged man with intelligent eyes and a soldier's bearing received them. Praetor Marcus studied both women carefully before speaking. Lady Aurelia suggests you have a matter of some delicacy, he said, addressing Livia directly. Something concerning manumission? Livia straightened her spine, summoning the dignity her father had instilled in her. Yes, Praetor. I seek freedom for a gladiator who has more than earned it through his service to Rome's entertainment. Gladiators fall under specialized law, Marcus replied, though his tone remained neutral rather than dismissive. Their path to freedom is typically through the rudis, not legal petition. Unless, Livia countered, there were irregularities in his original enslavement that would invalidate the current ownership. The praetor's eyebrow rose slightly. And you have documentation of such irregularities? From within her cloak, Livia produced a sealed document, the product of a night's careful work with borrowed ink and parchment, based on her memories of her father's business records. Here, she said, offering it with a steady hand, the proof that justice demands his freedom. Praetor Marcus studied the document with practiced scrutiny, his expression revealing nothing as his eyes moved methodically across the parchment. Livia held her breath, acutely aware that her amateur forgery might not withstand expert examination. Interesting, he finally said, looking up to meet her gaze. This suggests that Lucius Marius Secundus was arrested without proper senatorial approval, making the subsequent sale of his son illegal under Cornelian law. Livia nodded, hoping her face didn't betray the thundering of her heart. As you can see, Praetor, the proper documentation for political arrests requires 3 senatorial seals. This document bears only 2. Indeed. Marcus set the parchment aside carefully. A technical irregularity, but law is built on such technicalities. He studied her with renewed interest. You seem unusually knowledgeable about legal matters for a woman of modest station. My father was a merchant, Livia replied, lifting her chin slightly. He believed education should not be limited by gender. A ghost of a smile touched the praetor's lips. A progressive view. He turned to Aurelia. And your interest in this matter, Lady Aurelia? What does Senator Cassius's daughter gain from freeing a gladiator? Justice, Praetor, Aurelia answered smoothly. Nothing more. Marcus's skeptical expression suggested he understood there was much more to the story, but he didn't press further. Instead, he returned his attention to Livia. I will need to verify these claims, he said. The archives will have the original arrest records. If what you suggest is true, I could issue a writ of manumission that would supersede any gladiatorial contract. He paused. However, such matters take time. typically several weeks of investigation. The gladiator in question fights his final match in 3 days, Livia said, unable to keep the urgency from her voice. A match designed to ensure his death. Ah. Understanding dawned in the praetor's eyes. This is about Marius the Unyielding, isn't it? The champion scheduled to face the Thracian? Livia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Now I understand Senator Cassius's unusual interest in these games. He glanced at Aurelia. No offense intended, my lady. None taken, Aurelia replied coolly. I am well aware of my father's investments. After a moment of contemplation, Marcus reached for a blank sheet of parchment. I cannot promise freedom before the match, he said, dipping his stylus in ink. But I can issue a provisional stay that might offer some protection regardless of the arena's outcome. He wrote quickly, the scratch of his stylus the only sound in the small chamber. When finished, he sprinkled sand over the wet ink, then sealed the document with his official ring pressed into hot wax. Present this to the editor of the games, he instructed, handing the sealed parchment to Livia. It formally requests postponement of final judgment until my investigation is complete. Whether Gallus honors it, that I cannot guarantee. Thank you, praetor, Livia said, clutching the document like a lifeline. Don't thank me yet, Marcus cautioned. I'm not convinced your documentation is authentic, but the possibility of injustice warrants investigation. His expression softened slightly. And I have some sympathy for those caught in games played by powerful men. As they left the praetor's office, Livia's elation at having secured even this small official intervention was quickly tempered by Aurelia's cautious demeanor. We should separate, the senator's daughter advised, glancing nervously at the busy forum. My absence will be noticed soon. Livia gripped her arm. Aurelia, I can't thank you enough for... Don't, Aurelia interrupted. What I've done, it isn't solely for you. A complex emotion crossed her face. Sometimes the only power we have is in refusing to be what they expect. With that cryptic statement, she slipped away into the crowd, her modest disguise soon lost among the flowing mass of citizens going about their daily business. Titus materialized at Livia's side, his casual posture belying the alertness in his eyes. Success? He asked quietly. Partial, Livia replied, securing the praetor's document inside her cloak. We have official interest, but no guarantee. As they made their way back toward the ludus, taking a circuitous route to avoid attention, Livia sensed a change in Titus's demeanor. His steps slowed, and his gaze darted more frequently to the shadowed alleys they passed. Is something wrong? She asked. Titus pulled her into the recessed doorway of a closed shop, his voice dropping to a whisper. We're being followed. 2 men, trying to look like ordinary citizens but moving with too much purpose. Livia's hand went instinctively to the document hidden beneath her cloak. Senator Cassius's men? Possibly. Titus peered cautiously around the edge of the doorway. Or someone working for Bassus. The Lanista has eyes throughout the city. What do we do? Change of plan. Titus decided. We'll separate. I'll draw them off while you return to the ludus by the service entrance near the bathhouse. Alarm shot through Livia. That's too dangerous for you. I'm a gladiator, Titus replied with a grim smile. Danger is my trade. He gripped her shoulders. Listen carefully. If I don't return by nightfall, tell Marius that the final match is worse than we feared. The Thracian is not just a deadly opponent. He's been promised his freedom specifically for killing Marius. How do you know this? Because I was approached last night, Titus admitted, shame flickering across his features. Senator Cassius's agent offered me a substantial sum to ensure Marius enters the arena, compromised. Understanding dawned on Livia like a cold wave. You're the informant. You've been feeding them information about us. Not willingly, Titus insisted, his voice strained. They have my sister and her children. Told me they'd be sold to separate mining operations if I didn't cooperate. Livia studied his face, searching for truth or deception in his anguished expression. And now? Why help us? Because Marius treated me like a brother when I arrived at the ludus, half dead from the journey and expected to die in my first match. Titus's jaw tightened. I've been playing both sides, giving the senators men enough to keep my family safe while trying to protect Marius where I could. A shout from further down the street interrupted them. Two men in nondescript tunics were pointing in their direction, beginning to push through the crowd toward them. Go, Titus urged, pushing Livia toward the opposite direction. Get that document to Marius. It might be his only chance. Before she could protest further, Titus stepped into the street, deliberately drawing attention to himself. He called out loudly as if drunk, and began walking with exaggerated swagger directly toward their pursuers. Livia hesitated only a moment before slipping away, the weight of the praetor's document heavy against her heart, Titus's confession heavier still. The day of the final match dawned with an ominous red sky that sailors would have recognized as warning. By mid-morning, the Colosseum was filled beyond capacity, spectators packed shoulder to shoulder on the stone benches, the air electric with anticipation. The emperor's representatives occupied the imperial box, their presence elevating the games from mere entertainment to political theater. In the preparation chamber, Marius stood alone, having requested privacy for his final preparations. The praetor's document lay hidden in his quarters, its potential protection uncertain. Titus had returned late the previous night, bruised but triumphant, having led their pursuers on a wild chase through Rome's labyrinthine streets before losing them near the river. Marius methodically checked each piece of his armor, his mind clear despite the weight of what awaited him. After a decade in the ludus, death held no particular terror. It had been his constant companion, separated only by skill and fortune. What troubled him was leaving Livia unprotected in a world designed to exploit those without power. It's time, Doctor announced from the doorway, his weathered face solemn. Marius nodded, reaching for his helmet. Any word from Gallus about the praetor's stay? Nothing, Doctor replied. But the official announcement usually comes at the introduction. He hesitated, then added, the Thracian has already entered the arena. The crowd? They're calling for blood today. Then blood they shall have, Marius said grimly, securing his helmet. Though perhaps not the blood they expect. The ascent to the arena felt different this time, not merely a journey to combat but potentially a final passage. As Marius emerged into the sunlight, the crowd's reaction was deafening, a wall of sound that physically pushed against him. Across the sand stood the Thracian butcher, a mountain of a man whose armor was adorned with trophies from fallen opponents. A finger bone here, a scrap of leather there, a macabre testament to his lethal reputation. In the official's box, Gallus stood to address the crowd, flanked by Senator Cassius and a cluster of dignitaries. Marius searched their faces for any sign that the praetor's intervention had been acknowledged, but found only the usual mix of anticipation and calculated political expressions. People of Rome, Gallus called out, his voice carrying across the arena. Today we witness the culmination of our special contests. Marius the unyielding faces his greatest challenge, the undefeated champion of Thrace. The crowd roared its approval. Gallus raised his hands for silence. By special decree, and in honor of the emperor's upcoming visit, today's match shall be fought to the ultimate conclusion. No mercy, no reprieve. Only one warrior will leave the arena alive. Marius's heart sank. The praetor's stay had either been ignored or overruled. There would be no legal salvation today, only survival through combat or the release of death. As the signal to begin was given, Marius and the Thracians circled each other with the wary respect of predators recognizing a worthy opponent. The Thracian carried two short swords as expected, his fighting style evident in his balanced stance and the way he kept both blades in constant, subtle motion. Their first exchange was tentative, testing strikes and parries, each man assessing the other's speed and technique. The Thracian was powerful but surprisingly agile for his size, his dual blades creating a whirlwind of steel that required all of Marius's concentration to counter. They separated, reassessing. The crowd's initial bloodlust had settled into appreciative attention. This would be no quick slaughter but a contest of skill and endurance. I know you, the Thracian said suddenly, his accent thick but his Latin understandable. "You were the philosopher's son. From Capua." Marius froze momentarily, shocked to hear his past spoken aloud in this place of deliberate forgetting. "You remember incorrectly," he replied, maintaining his guard. The Thracian shook his head, circling slowly. "I was a house slave for the merchant who sponsored your father's school. I saw you practice rhetoric in the garden." A grim smile appeared beneath his helmet. "Before soldiers came and the world changed." The revelation staggered Marius more effectively than any physical blow. This man, this killer he was meant to face to the death, was a connection to his life before the arena, before blood and sand became the boundaries of his existence. "If you know who I was," Marius said carefully, "then you know this match is rigged against me." "All matches are rigged," the Thracian replied, lunging suddenly with both blades. Marius parried desperately, the force of the attack driving him backward across the sand. The crowd roared its approval at the sudden violence, the matched skill of the combatants. As they separated again, breathing heavily, the Thracian continued as if their conversation had never been interrupted. "They promised me freedom for killing you. A full pardon, citizenship, and gold." "And if you fail?" Marius asked, circling cautiously. "Then I die," the Thracian said simply. "But I have no family left, no one waiting. You, I think, have found something worth living for." Before Marius could respond, the Thracian attacked again, his blades a blur of deadly precision. This time, one found its mark, slicing across Marius's thigh with a bright flare of pain. First blood had been drawn. In the stands, Livia watched from a secluded corner where Doctor had positioned her hands clenched so tightly that her nails cut into her palms. Beside her, Aurelia sat disguised as a common citizen, her presence a dangerous show of solidarity. "The praetors stay," Livia whispered. "Why haven't they announced it?" "Politics," Aurelia replied grimly. "My father likely intercepted it or paid Gallus to ignore it." Below, the fight intensified. Marius recovered from the leg wound, adapting his strategy to protect his injured side. The Thracian pressed his advantage ruthlessly, yet there was something restrained in his attacks, deadly but not fueled by the hatred or bloodlust that typically drove gladiatorial combat. A pattern emerged that only the most experienced observers noticed. The Thracian's killing blows always fell just short, his fatal thrusts deliberately missing vital areas by hair's breadths. He was putting on a show of trying to kill Marius while actually engaging in a deadly dance that preserved both their lives. Marius recognized the strategy and responded in kind, their combat transforming into something unprecedented, two slaves choosing how to fight rather than simply trying to survive. Blood, sand, and sweat formed a gritty paste on Marius's skin as the combat entered its second hour. Both gladiators were bleeding from multiple wounds, none life-threatening but all sapping precious strength. The crowd remained enthralled, witnessing a display of skill rarely seen in the increasingly theatrical games that characterized modern Rome. "We cannot maintain this indefinitely," Marius muttered as they locked blades momentarily, their faces inches apart. "No," the Thracian agreed, pushing away to resume their deadly dance. "Soon they will recognize our deception." In the official's box, Senator Cassius leaned toward Gallus, his expression darkening. "Something is wrong," he hissed. "This should have ended already." Gallus studied the ongoing combat with narrowed eyes. "They seem evenly matched." "They're performing," Cassius insisted. "Look at their strikes, deadly enough to impress but never quite fatal." The editor frowned, watching more closely as the gladiators exchanged another series of blows. The senator was right. There was a pattern to their combat that suggested cooperation rather than true lethal intent. "Stop the match," Cassius demanded. "Declare it invalid." "Impossible," Gallus replied. "The crowd is entranced. Interrupting now would cause a riot." In the stands, Livia clutched Aurelia's arm as she noticed a commotion in the official's box. "They've realized," she whispered. "What happens now?" "They'll force a conclusion," Aurelia replied grimly. "Change the rules somehow." As if confirming her prediction, trumpets suddenly blared across the arena. Gallus rose, raising his hands for attention. "People of Rome," he called out, "you have witnessed unprecedented skill today. But to honor the emperor properly, we require a decisive conclusion." The crowd murmured, uncertain where this was leading. "To ensure this match reaches its proper end," Gallus continued, "fresh opponents will join the contest. Let us truly test these champions' endurance." From gates on opposite sides of the arena, 4 additional gladiators emerged, 2 heavily armored secutors and 2 nimble retiarii with nets and tridents. The crowd roared its approval at this unexpected twist. "This is madness," Aurelia gasped. "It's not combat, it's execution." Livia rose from her seat, a desperate plan forming. "I need to reach Praetor Marcus. Now." "It's too late," Aurelia protested. "Even if we found him by the time." "Not for intervention," Livia interrupted. "For witness." In the arena, Marius and the Thracian found themselves suddenly back-to-back, facing the new opponents who spread out to surround them. "Well, philosopher's son," the Thracian said with grim humor, "it seems Rome has tired of our performance." "So it appears," Marius agreed, adjusting his grip on his gladius. "Preferences?" "I'll take the netmen," the Thracian replied. "You handle the walking fortresses." They separated, each engaging their chosen opponents with renewed intensity. The dynamic of the contest had fundamentally changed, no longer a match duel but a desperate fight for survival against overwhelming odds. Marius faced the secutors with the focused calm born from a decade of life-or-death encounters. These men were skilled but predictable, their heavy armor limiting mobility and encouraging direct approaches. He used their weight against them, drawing them into the softer sand at the arena's edge where their footing became treacherous. Across the arena, the Thracian fought with brutal efficiency, having already entangled 1 retiarius in his own net. But the advantage was temporary. 6 against 2 were odds that skill alone could not overcome indefinitely. In the official's box, a new commotion arose as Praetor Marcus arrived, accompanied by his lictors and, surprisingly, Livia herself. The praetor's expression was thunderous as he confronted Gallus. "Editor," he said formally, his voice carrying authority that cut through the surrounding noise, "I presented a legal stay of execution for the gladiator Marius pending investigation of his original enslavement. Why has this been ignored?" Gallus paled slightly. "I received no such document, Praetor." "Yet I have witnesses who confirm its delivery," Marcus replied, nodding toward Livia. Senator Cassius stepped forward, his composure barely masking fury. "This is highly irregular, Praetor. Games in progress cannot be interrupted by legal matters." "When those legal matters concern the potential unlawful execution of a Roman citizen, they most certainly can," Marcus countered. A collective gasp rose from those close enough to hear. The concept of a gladiator potentially having citizenship rights was shocking and legally complicated. Below, unaware of the confrontation occurring above them, Marius had managed to dispatch 1 secutor and was wearing down the second. The Thracian had eliminated both retiarii but sustained a severe wound to his side in the process. Blood pooled beneath him as he turned to assist Marius. "The legal status of a gladiator is irrelevant once he enters the arena," Cassius argued. "The contract with the lanista supersedes all prior claims." "Not if the original enslavement was illegal," Marcus replied. "And certainly not if evidence exists that this match was deliberately arranged as an execution rather than fair combat." In the stunned silence that followed, Aurelia stepped forward from where she had been standing in the shadows. "Such evidence exists, Praetor," she said clearly. "I can testify to conversations where this match was explicitly arranged to ensure Marius's death, regardless of the arena's traditional rules." Senator Cassius stared at his daughter in shock and dawning comprehension. "You," he whispered. "You've been helping them." "I've been serving justice, Father," Aurelia replied, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "A concept you might reconsider embracing." Praetor Marcus seized the moment of confusion to step to the edge of the box and signal his lictors. The trained officials immediately raised their fasces, the bundled rods symbolizing Roman authority, and blew trumpets that cut across the arena's cacophony. "In the name of Roman law," Marcus's voice boomed, amplified by the Colosseum's perfect acoustics. "I order this contest suspended pending legal investigation." In the arena, Marius had just delivered a disabling blow to the second secutor when the trumpet sounded. He turned, breathing heavily, to find the Thracian on one knee, blood streaming from his side. "It seems," the Thracian said with a pained smile, "that you have friends in unexpected places, philosopher's son." Arena attendants rushed forward, surrounding both men as the crowd erupted in a mixture of protest and excitement. Confusion reigned as conflicting orders were shouted across the sand. Marius caught sight of Livia standing in the official's box beside a man in praetor's robes, her face simultaneously terrified and triumphant. Against impossible odds, she had found a way to halt the execution masquerading as sport. Chaos followed the praetor's intervention. The crowd, denied their bloody conclusion, erupted in competing chants, some demanding the match continue, others intrigued by the unprecedented legal drama unfolding before them. Gallus frantically tried to restore order while Senator Cassius, his political instincts alert to shifting winds, quietly withdrew from the official's box. Marius and the Thracian were escorted from the arena under guard, not back to the ludus, but to a holding chamber within the Colosseum complex. Medics attended their wounds under the watchful eyes of the praetor's lictors. "What happens now?" the Thracian asked as a physician stitched his side wound. "I don't know," Marius admitted. "This is unprecedented." Hours passed in uncertain waiting. Outside, they could hear the games continuing with hastily arranged substitute matches. Finally, as evening approached, Praetor Marcus entered their chamber, accompanied by two scribes and Livia, whose relieved smile at seeing Marius alive was quickly suppressed in the formal setting. "Your situation presents unique legal complexities," Marcus began without preamble. "The documentation suggesting illegal enslavement requires thorough investigation, which I've initiated. However, there are political considerations that demand more immediate resolution." "Meaning Senator Cassius wants this handled quietly," Marius surmised. "Indeed." The praetor's mouth twitched in what might have been approval at Marius's directness. "The senator finds himself in a delicate position, particularly given his daughter's testimony." "And Bassus?" Marius asked. "The Lanista still holds my contract." "Ah, the Lanista." Marcus gestured to one of his scribes, who produced a document. "It seems Bassus is suddenly amenable to negotiation, particularly after certain irregularities in his tax records were noticed by my office." The Thracian gave a short bark of laughter, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Rome's justice is ever practical." "The arrangement is this," Marcus continued, unrolling the document. "In recognition of exceptional service to the games, and in honor of the emperor's upcoming visit, both of you will receive the rudis, the wooden sword of freedom, in a ceremony tomorrow." Marius stared at the praetor, scarcely believing what he was hearing. "Freedom? Just like that?" "Hardly just like that," Marcus replied dryly. "This represents significant negotiation and, frankly, several threatened prosecutions. But yes, freedom, with conditions." "What conditions?" the Thracian asked warily. "You," Marcus said, pointing to the Thracian, "will accept military service on the eastern frontier for 5 years. Your combat skills will serve Rome in a more productive capacity." The Thracian considered this, then nodded slowly. "Acceptable. Better to die fighting Rome's enemies than killing for entertainment." "And me?" Marius asked. Marcus's gaze shifted to Livia briefly before returning to Marius. "You will receive limited citizenship rights, enough to legally marry and own property, but not to vote or hold office. You will remain in Rome for 1 year, making occasional appearances at official functions to demonstrate the emperor's magnanimity in freeing such a celebrated gladiator." "And after that year?" "Assuming no complications, you'll be free to go wherever you wish within the empire." The deal seemed too good to be true, raising Marius's suspicions. Why would Senator Cassius agree to this? "He wanted me dead." "The senator," Marcus said carefully, "has recognized that certain events, if made public, would damage his standing far more than your survival. particularly given his daughter's willingness to testify about his manipulation of the games for financial gain, a serious offense when the emperor's name is invoked. Livia stepped forward. My uncle has also agreed to formally release me from his guardianship. I will be legally independent. The implications of this arrangement washed over Marius. Freedom, citizenship, the right to marry, a future beyond blood and sand, all seemingly secured by Livia's courage and the unexpected integrity of a Roman official. There is one more thing, Marcus added, his tone turning grave. Senator Cassius, while accepting these terms, is not a man who forgets perceived wrongs. I strongly suggest you exercise caution during your remaining time in Rome. With that warning hanging in the air, the praetor departed, leaving his scribes to handle the formal documentation. Once they were alone save for the guards at the door, Livia rushed to Marius's side, her hands gently touching his bandaged wounds. I was so afraid, she whispered, when they sent in the additional gladiators. How did you manage to bring the praetor to the arena? Marius asked, still marveling at what she had accomplished. Aurelia, Livia explained. She knew where to find him, and her father's name still opened doors. Explained the situation, that a potentially illegal execution was about to occur despite his stay order. He came immediately. And Aurelia? What happens to her now? Livia's expression turned worried. She's seeking sanctuary with her mother's family in Athens. Her betrothal has been complicated by her testimony against her father. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bassus, the Lanista's usual swagger diminished by recent events. He regarded Marius with a mixture of resentment and calculation. My champion, he said, the possessive term now ringing hollow. It seems you've outmaneuvered us all. Not me, Marius replied, nodding toward Livia. Her. Bassus studied Livia with newfound respect. Indeed, the virgin sent to shame a gladiator instead raised him to freedom. He laughed bitterly. The poets will make something of that, I'm sure. What do you want, Bassus? Marius asked tiredly. To deliver a warning, the Lanista replied, his voice dropping. The senator's men were seen in the Subura after dark, hiring knives. Your legal victory today has powerful enemies. If you survive until tomorrow's ceremony, I'd suggest leaving Rome as soon as your obligatory year is complete. After Bassus departed, Marius and Livia exchanged concerned glances. Their victory, it seemed, remained precarious. We should find somewhere secure for tonight, Livia said. Not the ludus. I know someone, the Thracian interjected, having overheard their conversation. A former gladiator who purchased his freedom years ago. He runs a tavern in the Aventine district, not luxurious but safe and anonymous. As night fell over Rome, Marius and Livia, accompanied by two of the praetor's men, made their way through the city's darkened streets toward the promised sanctuary. The freedom they had fought so hard to secure suddenly seemed fragile, threatened by the vindictive power of those they had defied. Stay close, Marius murmured as they navigated a particularly narrow alley, his gladiator's instincts alert to potential danger in every shadow. Behind them, moving with professional silence, four figures detached themselves from the darkness and began to follow. Marius sensed the followers before he saw them, an awareness honed by years of survival in the arena. He guided Livia closer to the wall of the narrow street, positioning himself between her and potential danger. We're being followed, he murmured to the praetor's guards, who nodded almost imperceptibly, their hands moving to their weapons. As they turned a corner into a small courtyard, the trap was sprung. Two men rushed from a darkened doorway while the four who had been following blocked their retreat. All were dressed in nondescript tunics, their faces partially covered, with short blades gleaming in the moonlight. Stay behind me, Marius ordered Livia, wishing desperately for his gladius instead of the small dagger he'd been permitted to carry. The praetor's guards drew their swords, moving to flank Marius, but they were outnumbered 3-1. The attackers closed in with the coordinated movements of experienced killers. The woman isn't to be harmed, one of them instructed. The others are expendable. As the first assassin lunged, Marius sidestepped with arena-trained precision, using his attacker's momentum to drive him face-first into the stone wall. The impact produced a sickening crunch as the man's nose shattered, blood spattering across the weathered stones. The courtyard erupted into violence, steel against steel, grunts of exertion, the desperate shuffle of feet on cobblestones. The praetor's guards fought bravely but were quickly overwhelmed by superior numbers. One fell with a blade between his ribs, while the other was driven to his knees by a vicious blow to the head. Marius found himself facing 3 attackers simultaneously, his smaller dagger a poor defense against their longer blades. He retreated step by step, using every trick learned in a decade of mortal combat, but the outcome seemed inevitable. Then a ceramic roof tile smashed into the head of one attacker, followed by another. Livia had climbed partway up a wooden staircase attached to a nearby building and was raining down improvised missiles on their assailants. "Run!" Marius shouted to her, using the distraction to drive his dagger into an attacker's thigh. Instead of fleeing, Livia's response was to hurl another tile with surprising accuracy, striking an assassin who had been about to stab Marius from behind. The tide of battle shifted further when shouts echoed from a nearby street. Residents, awakened by the commotion, emerged with torches and makeshift weapons. Rome's common citizens might tolerate officially sanctioned violence in the arena, but street killings in their neighborhood were bad for business and safety. Faced with growing resistance and unexpected witnesses, the surviving assassins melted away into the darkness, dragging their wounded with them. Marius stood breathing heavily in the small courtyard, blood, mostly not his own, splattered across his tunic. Livia descended from her perch and rushed to his side, her face pale but determined in the flickering torchlight. "Are you hurt?" she asked, examining him with anxious hands. "Nothing serious," he assured her, though his side burned where a blade had grazed him. He looked around at the gathering locals. "We need to leave before questions become complicated." An elderly shopkeeper stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "You're that gladiator, aren't you? The one they stopped the match for today." Marius tensed, uncertain whether this recognition would bring help or further danger. "My grandson was at the games," the old man continued. "Said it was the finest display of skill he'd ever seen." He gestured to a narrow alley. "There's a back way to the Aventine through there. No one will follow if Publius is guiding you." He nodded to a burly man with a massive cudgel who stepped forward from the crowd. The impromptu escort delivered them safely to the tavern the Thracian had mentioned, a modest establishment tucked away on a quiet street, its wooden door reinforced with iron bands. The proprietor, a bull-necked man with the unmistakable profile of a former gladiator, welcomed them without questions and showed them to a small but clean room above the main floor. "The praetor's man," Livia said once they were alone, her composure finally cracking. "Is he dead?" Marius confirmed grimly. "The other is badly wounded. There will be consequences for this attack." "But not necessarily justice," Livia noted, helping him clean the cut on his side. "Not if my uncle's influence remains strong. Then we must ensure our path takes us far from his reach once our year in Rome is complete." Dawn broke over the city, painting the tiled rooftops gold as they made their way, now with a full escort of the praetor's lictors, to the Colosseum for the manumission ceremony. The night's violence had been reported to Marcus, whose tightened jaw and cold eyes suggested retribution would eventually find those responsible. The ceremony itself was brief but momentous. Before a smaller but still substantial crowd, Marius and the Thracian knelt as the rudis, the wooden sword symbolizing freedom, was presented to each of them. As Marius's fingers closed around the simple wooden hilt, 10 years of servitude lifted from his shoulders like a physical weight. 1 year later, a modest house stood on a small plot of land outside Capua, its garden flourishing under careful tending, its door marked with a simple carving of Fortuna's wheel. Inside, Marius, no longer the gladiator but a free man and citizen, carefully copied philosophical texts for a small but growing clientele of educated Romans seeking wisdom from classical sources. In the garden, Livia harvested herbs for both cooking and healing, her knowledge expanded through study with a local physician. Her belly had just begun to swell with their first child, a new life that would know nothing of arenas or slavery. The wooden door swung open as Titus arrived, accompanied by Doctor, both men having served their obligations and secured their own freedom. Behind them came others, former arena slaves, displaced peasants, even a few women who had escaped brothels, all finding temporary or permanent shelter under the protection of the former champion and his wife. Livia welcomed them with the quiet dignity that had transformed her from a frightened virgin sent as a cruel joke into the respected domina of a household that stood as a refuge for Rome's discarded. "They're calling you the Gladiator Queen in Capua," Titus told her with a grin as they settled around the evening meal. Livia smiled, her hand finding Marius's across the table. "Not a queen," she corrected gently. "Just a woman who found strength when it was needed." "My queen nonetheless," Marius said, raising her hand to his lips. The joke intended to destroy them had instead created something remarkable, a home built on courage, a family forged through adversity, and a legacy that would endure long after the roar of the arena had faded from memory.